Imagine this. You are Aristippus of Cyrene, and it is the year 380 before Christ. You are walking through the torchlit streets of Athens after a symposium where wine flowed like water and philosophers debated pleasure itself as the highest good. Your tunic reeks of perfumed oils and spilled wine. The hetaira who accompanied you tonight still has her hand on your arm, her fingers tracing patterns on your skin that would make your fellow philosophers blush if they had not been doing exactly the same thing moments ago. But here's what you know that will reshape Western civilization for the next 1,000 years. Pleasure is not something to apologize for. It is not a distraction from wisdom. It is wisdom itself, the immediate sensation of skin against skin, wine warming your throat, laughter echoing through marble halls. This is what it means to be alive. What you do not realize as you stumble through the Athenian night is that your philosophy will travel across the Mediterranean, twist through Roman minds, and become the intellectual justification for excess so extreme it will take Christianity centuries to suppress. Your simple idea that pleasure is good will become permission for emperors to do things that will horrify future generations. The morning sun burns through your wine headache as you arrive at the academy. Plato sees you and his face twists with that familiar contempt. He thinks you have betrayed Socrates by choosing pleasure over virtue. But you remember your teacher differently. Socrates drank, laughed, loved. Why should wisdom require suffering? The Cyrenaic school you are building teaches something revolutionary. There is no afterlife to prepare for, no cosmic justice to fear, no gods judging your private moments. There is only now. The pleasure of this moment or the pain of this moment. Choose pleasure. Always choose pleasure. This is not hedonism in the way future generations will understand it. You are not advocating for mindless excess. You are teaching calculated enjoyment, the art of extracting maximum pleasure from every experience while avoiding the pain that comes from overindulgence. Wine is good. Drunkenness that brings vomiting and shame is bad. Intimate companionship is good. Relationships that bring jealousy and suffering are bad. Physical pleasure is the measure of all things. If it feels good and causes no pain, it is good. If it causes pain, it is bad. The mathematics are simple. Your students gather in the afternoon heat. Young men from wealthy families who can afford to study philosophy instead of working. They lean forward as you explain that the body is not separate from the soul, that physical sensation is not inferior to intellectual contemplation. One student asks about the gods. Do they not punish those who seek only pleasure? You smile. The gods, if they exist, are too busy with their own pleasures to care about ours. Look at the myths. Zeus transforms himself to seduce mortals. Aphrodite manipulates gods and humans alike for her amusement. Dionysus demands ecstatic worship that breaks every social boundary. The divine realm is not a place of restraint. It is a realm of unrestrained desire. We should not aspire to be less than the gods. Another student asks about women. Should they also pursue pleasure? You pause. This is dangerous territory in Athens where women are property and pleasure is a male privilege. But your philosophy is honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable. If pleasure is the highest good, then it is the highest good for all beings capable of experiencing pleasure. Women, slaves, foreigners, all deserve pleasure. Your fellow philosophers will mock you for this. Plato will write dialogues where you are the fool, but you know something they refuse to accept. Pleasure needs no justification beyond itself. The symposia you host become legendary in Athens. Not the restrained philosophical gatherings Plato describes in his sanitized dialogues, but real evenings where wine loosens tongues and heterae are not just serving girls, but participants in philosophical discussion. Theodota, the most famous courtesan in Athens, joins your circle. She is brilliant, educated, and understands pleasure in ways most philosophers never will. She explains how her profession is the most philosophical of all. She studies desire. masters the arts of pleasure, and receives payment for bringing joy into the world. What could be more aligned with Cyrenaic principles? The traditional philosophers are scandalized. Philosophy should elevate men above their base desires, not celebrate them. But you see their hypocrisy. They visit the same courtesans they condemn in public. They drink the same wine they claim clouds judgment. They seek the same pleasures they insist are obstacles to wisdom. Your philosophy at least has the virtue of honesty. You are not pretending that asceticism makes you holy. You are admitting that pleasure makes you human. But here is where the philosophy starts to change. Your grandson, also named Aristippus, takes your teachings further. If pleasure is good, why limit it? Why calculate and measure? Why worry about consequences when there is only this moment? The younger Aristippus teaches something more dangerous: immediate gratification without concern for future pain. If tomorrow brings suffering, that is tomorrow's problem. Today demands pleasure. This is the mutation that will travel to Rome. Not your careful hedonism, but your grandson's reckless version. The idea that intellectual people, educated people, philosophical people can justify anything that brings pleasure. The framework is in place. Now it just needs the right environment to flourish. 50 years after your death, another philosopher arrives on the scene who will complete the transformation you started. Epicurus of Samos opens his garden school in Athens in 307 before Christ, and his message sounds similar to yours but contains a crucial difference. He teaches that pleasure is the absence of pain rather than the presence of sensation. This sounds more restrained than your teachings, more sophisticated, more acceptable to traditional Greek sensibilities. But it contains a trap. If pleasure is the absence of pain, then anything that removes pain is philosophical. Wine that numbs emotional distress is philosophical. Intimate encounters that distract from existential dread are philosophical. Excess that drowns out the fear of death is philosophical. Epicurus himself lives modestly. He eats simple food, maintains a small community, teaches restraint and friendship. But his words can be interpreted differently by those who want permission rather than wisdom. The garden becomes a scandal in Athens for different reasons than your symposia. Epicurus admits women as equal students. He welcomes slaves. His community lives together, sharing meals and discussions without the rigid social hierarchies that define Athenian life. The conservatives are horrified. Philosophy should reinforce social order, not dissolve it. But Epicurus argues that if pleasure and the absence of pain are the highest goods, then the arbitrary distinctions between free and slave, male and female, Greek and barbarian are obstacles to wisdom. This is radical. This is dangerous. This is exactly what Roman aristocrats will later use to justify gatherings where social boundaries disappear in pursuit of pleasure. Epicurus writes that death is nothing to fear because when we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we are not. Therefore, there is no reason to deny yourself pleasure while you live. No afterlife is waiting. No punishment is coming. No gods are watching. There is only the brief span of existence, and the wise person extracts as much pleasure and as little pain from that span as possible. His followers memorize his principal doctrines. Nothing to fear in God, nothing to feel in death. Good is easy to obtain. Evil is easy to endure. These teachings spread through the Mediterranean world like fire through dry grass. Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily become centers of Epicurean philosophy. Trade routes carry his ideas to Alexandria, to Antioch, to every corner of the Hellenistic world, and everywhere the philosophy travels, it mutates. The careful distinctions Epicurus made between necessary and unnecessary pleasures blur. The emphasis on friendship and simple living fades. What remains is the core permission structure. Pleasure is good. Death is nothing. The gods do not care. Do what feels right. By the time Roman armies march into Greece, Epicurean philosophy has been simmering for 2 centuries, ready to explode when it meets Roman ambition and wealth. The year is 146 before Christ. Roman legions under Lucius Mummius sack Corinth and burn it to the ground. Greece becomes a Roman province, but Rome does not just conquer Greece militarily. Greece conquers Rome culturally. The Romans are suspicious at first. Cato the Elder stands in the Senate and warns that Greek philosophy will corrupt Roman virtue. He is right to worry, but he cannot stop what is coming. Roman aristocrats hire Greek tutors for their children. Greek philosophers arrive in Rome as slaves and teachers. Greek ideas about pleasure, about wisdom, about the good life infiltrate the Roman ruling class, and the Romans, with their vast wealth and absence of restraint, take Greek philosophy to places the Greeks never imagined. Now that you have witnessed how Greek philosophy about pleasure crossed from Athens to Rome, you are beginning to see the patterns that transformed intellectual debate into imperial excess. The Cyrenaic celebration of immediate sensation, the Epicurean framework that defined pleasure as the highest good, these were not just abstract theories. They became permission structures that Roman aristocrats used to justify behavior that would have shocked their Greek teachers. If uncovering how philosophical movements become corrupted when they meet absolute power resonates with your curiosity about real history, subscribing ensures you never miss these deep dives into the dark transformations of ancient wisdom. The stories waiting ahead will challenge everything you thought you knew about classical philosophy and Roman decadence. Because what comes next is not just about parties and excess. It is about how ideas shape civilizations, and how civilizations corrupt ideas. The Roman aristocrat Lucullus returns from the East in 66 before Christ with a fortune that makes him one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He has conquered kingdoms, seized treasures, and brought back something more dangerous than gold. He has brought back Greek philosophers who teach that the refined enjoyment of pleasure is the mark of a civilized man. Lucullus builds villas that are architectural marvels. His gardens are filled with statues of Greek gods in poses that celebrate physical beauty and sensual pleasure. His dining rooms are designed for elaborate feasts that last from sunset to dawn. But here is the crucial detail. Lucullus justifies all of this through Epicurean philosophy. He is not being decadent. He is being philosophical. He is pursuing pleasure intelligently, surrounding himself with beauty, engaging in sophisticated conversation while enjoying the finest food and wine the empire can provide. His friends include poets, philosophers, and other wealthy Romans who are equally committed to the philosophical life. The dinners at Lucullus' villa become legendary. The guests recline on couches as course after course arrives from kitchens where dozens of slaves work to create culinary masterpieces. Greek philosophers are present to provide intellectual entertainment, debating the nature of pleasure between courses. Beautiful slaves serve wine and other pleasures. The atmosphere is one of refined excess, where every sensation is calculated to provide maximum enjoyment. This is not a drunken orgy. It is a philosophical symposium. At least that is what Lucullus tells himself. Julius Caesar takes this template and amplifies it. According to Suetonius, Caesar hosts gatherings where the boundaries between philosophical discussion and physical pleasure blur completely. He invites senators, poets, philosophers, and beautiful companions of all genders. The parties begin with intellectual discourse. Poets recite new works. Philosophers debate ethics and pleasure. But as the night progresses and the wine flows, the gatherings transform into something else entirely. Caesar, who has studied Greek philosophy and considers himself a cultured man, sees no contradiction. The Greeks taught that pleasure is good. The body is not shameful. Physical beauty is worth celebrating. Why should refined people deny themselves experiences that bring joy? The justification is always philosophical. We are not animals rutting in the dark. We are civilized Romans appreciating beauty. pursuing pleasure with intelligence and taste. The fact that slaves are used, that social boundaries are violated, that what happens in these villas would horrify traditional Romans, all of this is waved away with references to Epicurus and freedom from superstition. The poet Catullus writes verses that capture this moment when Greek philosophy meets Roman wealth. His poems celebrate affairs with both men and women, describe intimate acts with a directness that would have shocked earlier generations, and justify everything through references to pleasure, beauty, and the brevity of life. His most famous lines echo Epicurean teaching. Let us live and love, Lesbia, and value at a penny all the talk of the stern old men. Suns may set and rise again, but for us when our brief light has set, there remains only one perpetual night. This is philosophy transformed into poetry, transformed into permission. The stern old men who object are fools who do not understand that we have one life, and that life should be spent in pleasure. But here is where Greek restraint dies completely. The Romans take the philosophical justification for pleasure and strip away all the Greek caution about moderation and consequence. Maecenas, the political advisor to Augustus, hosts gatherings at his villa that blend high culture and extreme indulgence. Musicians perform while guests enjoy pleasures that range from refined to depraved. Philosophers are present to explain how all of this aligns with the teachings of Epicurus. The absence of pain, the pursuit of pleasure, the rejection of irrational fears. Augustus himself, despite his public image as a moral reformer, is a frequent guest at these gatherings. The first emperor of Rome, the man who will claim to restore traditional values, participates in philosophical orgies justified by Greek teachings. The hypocrisy is staggering, but it works because everyone involved agrees to call it philosophy rather than degeneracy. The transformation is complete. Greek philosophy about pleasure has become Roman permission for excess, and then the emperors take over and things get truly dark. When power becomes absolute, philosophy becomes the language of atrocity. Tiberius, the second Roman emperor, retires to the island of Capri in 26 of the Common Era. According to Suetonius, he transforms the island into a personal pleasure garden that makes Lucullus look restrained. He builds 12 villas across the island, each dedicated to a different type of pleasure. He staffs them with slaves trained in specialized skills. He fills libraries with Greek philosophical texts and erotic art from across the empire. And he invites philosophers to his island to justify what happens there. The historian Tacitus describes gatherings where Tiberius, now in his 60s and freed from the responsibilities of governing, pursues pleasures that cannot be described in detail without violating modern standards of decency. But here is the key point. Philosophers are present. They explain how the emperor is following Epicurean principles. He is freed from the fear of death, from irrational superstitions, from the judgments of inferior minds. He is pursuing pleasure intelligently, creating a controlled environment where all desires can be safely explored. The slaves used in these villas have no choice, but that is conveniently ignored. Philosophy provides the language to erase their humanity. Nero takes everything Tiberius did and makes it public. When he becomes emperor in 54 of the Common Era at the age of 16, he has been educated by the Stoic philosopher Seneca. But Nero does not embrace Stoic restraint. He embraces the aspects of Greek philosophy that justify his desires. He builds the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a palace complex so vast it covers multiple Roman hills. The dining rooms rotate to follow the sun. The ceilings open to shower guests with flower petals and perfume. Slaves operate hidden mechanisms that transform rooms from banquet halls to intimate chambers to theatrical stages. Nero hosts gatherings that last for days. Senators are required to attend and participate in activities that violate every boundary of Roman decorum. But Nero has court philosophers who explain that he is not being a tyrant. He is being enlightened. The Greeks taught that conventional morality is just superstition, that true wisdom means seeing through social constraints, that the philosopher king should live according to nature rather than custom. And Nero is living according to his nature. Petronius serves as Nero's arbiter of elegance, literally his judge of taste. Petronius is a philosopher, a writer, a man of refined sensibilities who decides what pleasures are sophisticated and what pleasures are vulgar. His novel, The Satyricon, survives in fragments and describes a world where wealthy Romans attend feasts that begin with elaborate food and end with activities that blur all social boundaries. The novel is satirical, but it is also documentary. This is what is happening in Nero's Rome. Philosophy has become the servant of power. Greek ideas about pleasure have been twisted into justification for systematic exploitation. The slaves who serve at these gatherings, who are used and discarded, whose bodies become objects for philosophical experimentation, they have no voice in the texts that survive. But they were there, thousands of them, trapped in a system that used the language of wisdom to justify their abuse. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who was supposed to guide Nero toward virtue, participates in this system. He becomes one of the richest men in Rome through his association with the emperor. He attends gatherings he should condemn. He writes philosophical treatises about virtue and restraint while living in luxury that rivals Nero's. The contradiction eventually becomes unbearable. In 65 of the Common Era, Seneca is accused of conspiracy and forced to commit suicide. As he dies, he dictates final thoughts to his secretaries. But he never truly confronts the central hypocrisy. He helped create a system where philosophy justified imperial excess. He brought Greek wisdom to Rome and watched it transform into permission for atrocity. The pattern continues through later emperors. Domitian hosts elaborate banquets where philosophical discussion mixes with increasingly extreme entertainment. Commodus, who believes himself to be the reincarnation of Hercules, justifies his behavior through references to Greek hero cults and divine pleasure. But the most extreme example comes in the early 3rd century with the Emperor Elagabalus. He reigns from 218 to 222 of the Common Era, ascending to power at age 14. He brings Syrian religious practices to Rome, but he also embraces a corrupted version of Greek philosophy. He hosts gatherings that contemporary historians describe with shocked fascination. Dinner guests are seated according to the size of their sexual organs. Philosophers debate pleasure while entertainments occur that push beyond even Roman tolerance. Elagabalus surrounds himself with intellectuals who explain that he is exploring the full range of human experience, that he is living according to nature, that conventional morality is for the uneducated masses. He justifies everything through references to Greek philosophy and Eastern mystery religions. The combination is devastating. What you are witnessing is not just imperial decadence. It is the systematic corruption of ideas. Greek philosophers like Aristippus and Epicurus developed sophisticated theories about pleasure, happiness, and the good life. They emphasized moderation, friendship, and the intelligent pursuit of sustainable pleasure. But when those ideas met Roman power and wealth, they mutated. The emphasis on moderation disappeared. The concern for consequences vanished. What remained was pure permission. If pleasure is good, and I want it, and I have the power to take it, then taking it is philosophical. The slaves, the exploitation, the violence, all of that can be erased by calling it philosophy rather than abuse. The early Christians recognize what has happened. They do not just attack Roman immorality. They attack the philosophical framework that justifies it. Augustine of Hippo, writing in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, dissects exactly how Greek philosophy was corrupted by Roman practice. Augustine has personal experience with this corruption. Before his conversion to Christianity, he spent years pursuing pleasure according to Epicurean and Manichaean principles. He attended gatherings where philosophy mixed with physical indulgence. He kept a concubine. He lived the philosophical life that Roman aristocrats claimed was the height of civilization. His confessions describe his gradual realization that this philosophical life was actually slavery. He was not free because he pursued pleasure. He was trapped by it. The philosophical framework that promised liberation actually created new chains. He saw how the language of wisdom was used to justify exploitation, how Greek teachings about pleasure became excuses for using other human beings as objects, how the symposium tradition that began with Aristippus drinking wine and debating pleasure ended with emperors hosting gatherings where human dignity disappeared entirely. The Christian assault on pagan philosophy is systematic. Church fathers argue that Greek philosophy, especially teachings about pleasure, led directly to Roman decadence. They are not entirely wrong. The ideas did provide justification, even if that justification was a corruption of what the original philosophers intended. The Council of Nicaea in 325 and subsequent church councils condemn not just pagan religious practices, but the philosophical frameworks that supported them. Epicureanism is declared heretical. The pursuit of physical pleasure is reframed as sin rather than wisdom. The body is now something to control rather than celebrate. The pendulum swings from one extreme to another. Where Roman aristocrats justified excess through philosophy, Christians justify repression through theology. The final blow comes in 529 when the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closes the philosophical schools in Athens. The institution that produced Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, and generations of thinkers is shut down because it represents pagan wisdom that corrupts rather than elevates. The philosophers flee to Persia. The books are scattered or destroyed. The tradition of Greek philosophy in Athens, which had continued for nearly 1,000 years, ends. What survives is filtered through Christian interpreters who preserved what they found useful and condemned what they found dangerous. The teachings about pleasure are among the first casualties. For the next 1,000 years, Epicureanism will be virtually unknown in Europe. When medieval scholars encounter references to Epicurus, they assume he was teaching pure degeneracy because that is what Christian authorities claimed. The careful distinctions, the emphasis on friendship and moderation, the warnings about excessive indulgence, all of that is lost. What remains is the caricature. Greek philosophers taught people to pursue pleasure. Romans pursued pleasure to horrifying excess. Therefore, Greek philosophy is dangerous. You came into this story thinking ancient philosophy was about wisdom and virtue, abstractions discussed by bearded men in togas who cared only about truth and reason. Now you leave understanding how those same philosophical traditions became justification for systematic exploitation that lasted centuries. This transformation from Aristippus walking through Athens celebrating immediate pleasure to Nero using philosophical language to justify imperial atrocities shows how ideas evolve or devolve when they meet concentrated power and unlimited wealth. The Greeks developed sophisticated ethical frameworks. The Romans had resources and appetites the Greeks never imagined. When the two combined, philosophy became permission. Wisdom became excuse, and the language of enlightenment served the purposes of exploitation. If this journey through philosophy's corruption has awakened your appetite for truth about how ideas shape and misshape civilizations, subscribing means you will continue accessing these revelations that philosophy courses will not teach. Your curiosity about the real human experience behind the sanitized textbooks deserves to be fed, because understanding how wisdom becomes corrupted is perhaps the most important lesson history offers. The legacy of this transformation persists today. When modern people reference Epicureanism, they usually mean indulgence rather than the careful pursuit of sustainable pleasure Epicurus actually taught. When students encounter Roman history, They learn about orgies and decadence without understanding the intellectual framework that made such excess possible. The symposium tradition, which began as philosophical discussion accompanied by moderate pleasure, has become in popular imagination nothing more than an ancient sex party. The truth is more complex and more disturbing. Greek philosophy about pleasure was not wrong. The pursuit of happiness, the rejection of irrational fears, the celebration of physical existence alongside intellectual growth, these ideas have value. But they also have dangers. When pleasure becomes the highest good, what happens to people who cannot defend themselves? When the absence of pain justifies any action that removes discomfort, who decides what counts as pain? When philosophical freedom means ignoring social boundaries, whose boundaries get violated? The Roman aristocrats who used Greek philosophy to justify their gatherings never asked these questions. They took the permission and ignored the consequences. They celebrated their own pleasure and ignored the slaves who made that pleasure possible. They called it philosophy and avoided calling it what it really was: exploitation with an intellectual veneer. The philosophers who participated in this system bear responsibility too. Seneca attended Nero's gatherings. Petronius judged pleasures. Countless Greek tutors in Roman households taught their students that pleasure was the highest good without emphasizing the ethics that should constrain that pursuit. They took Roman gold and provided Roman masters with the words they needed to feel civilized while behaving barbarically. Not all philosophers compromised. Some Stoics like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius maintained that virtue mattered more than pleasure. Some cynics like Diogenes rejected both pleasure and social convention in favor of radical simplicity. But these voices were drowned out by the chorus of philosophers willing to tell the powerful what they wanted to hear. Greek philosophy influenced Roman orgies not because the philosophy was inherently corrupting, but because people with power wanted justification for what they were already doing, and philosophy provided sophisticated language for base desires. The question for us is whether we have learned anything. We still use intellectual frameworks to justify behavior we know is wrong. We still create sophisticated arguments for why our pleasures are philosophical, while others' similar actions are vulgar. We continue to overlook the suffering of the powerless even as we praise our modern sense of morality. The names change, the details vary, but the underlying pattern endures. Insights born from sincere reflection often become distorted when used to justify authority. Philosophy that once asked how to live with virtue is repurposed to excuse self-indulgence. The path from Aristippus contemplating pleasure in Athens to Nero staging horrors in Rome is far shorter than we care to admit. It spans the space between seeking meaning in life and deciding that one's own enjoyment outweighs another's suffering. That dissent is always within reach. That distortion is always a threat. Greek philosophy didn't create Roman excess, it provided the vocabulary. The wealth and ambition of Rome shaped the message. The ideas were instruments. The Romans chose how to wield them. And we continue making similar decisions today.